This scene in Darkest Hour seems almost inconsequential. It gives us an establishing shot of World War II Britain, an introduction to the people, and a vignette into their everyday lives, but it actually does quite a lot more than what we see. Take a look at what Churchill says right after.
You know I've never ridden a bus.
Sir?
I believe I can boil an egg, but only because I've seen it done. The only time I tried riding the underground was during the general strike.
We realize Churchill doesn't have much in common with the British people. He only knows how to boil an egg only because he's seen it done. Churchill is not only detached, but barricaded from the people he's supposed to lead. And we see this in many of the film's subsequent shots, whether flying in an airplane above the French people, locked in a war room separated from the working class and front lines, or completely ignoring the outer cabinet.
Prime Minister, I wonder if we might schedule you to address the outer cabinet?
The other politicians in this film are even more guilty of this than Churchill, behaving with a kind of contrived, posh attitude that masks their self-awareness, to the point that it's even comedic.
Shame on you! Shame on you!
In a roundtable discussion with The Hollywood Reporter, Joe Wright said he didn't like British period films because they're usually about posh people. But a film about Churchill practically invites this.
Well, Churchill's posh. He's very posh.
So instead, what Joe Wright had to do was look for a way to find the humanity in people, finding humanity in Churchill when it seemed like he was so separate from it. And that's what Darkest Hour is essentially about. Joe Wright said the film was about doubt, but I believe it's something much more fundamental. Human weakness, the importance of vulnerability. In creating characters, Joe Wright wanted to do something that he could identify with, because as he states, film is essentially an expression of ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, it's who we are at the most fundamental, you know. It's the closest thing to my essence there is.
In Darkest Hour, you see two lives of Churchill, a juxtaposition of his home life with that of his public life, and these two come into conflict. On one hand, this film gives us a unique perspective of Churchill. We do not typically imagine Churchill getting a cat out from under a bed, or brushing off a meeting with George VI to nap at 4 p.m., or struggling to pay his bills. And this duality in character is demonstrated further early on. In this scene, when Clementine dresses Churchill, she tells Winston how she sees him differently compared to most other people. Where they see an eccentric, unfit leader, Clementine sees a man with a sense of humor, lack of vanity, and courage.
Let them see your true qualities.
But Churchill cannot reconcile these two sides of him. The side where he is a grounded husband and family man, and the side that's a leader of a nation, reflecting a state of himself that's almost ingenuine. He asks,
What?
Yourself.
And in answering to be himself, he asks,
Which self should I be today?
Looking at this film version of history, Churchill often masks his genuine human side with facade. Always looking for the perfect words, his speeches and pictures always show that the country is somehow winning the war, even though the truth is far from it. When Churchill is asked if the public should be informed of the collapse of Western Europe, he hesitates. He would rather try to rouse a resistance. And this facade Churchill puts on is something that he struggles with. We realize that Churchill is constantly in doubt, but as a leader, people should be able to look up to him as the person who has all the answers. Churchill wants to demonstrate that he knows what he's doing and shows that the decisions he makes are the right decisions, but the choices he makes often end up in high scrutiny and defeat. If we look at the events of the film alone, Churchill's decision to move soldiers from Calais to Dunkirk end in disaster. His refusal to negotiate peace talks almost made him lose his position. All the result of an ego. It can often feel like a sign of weakness to admit our struggles and ask for help, but Darkest Hour shows us that removing facade and putting ourselves in a state of vulnerability is critical, especially for leaders.
Are you not afraid? I am most terribly.
In this state, we put away our egos and become susceptible to not only opinion, but help. Vulnerability makes us listen. The power of vulnerability is probably most perfectly summed up when Clementine says this.
You are strong because you are imperfect. You are wise because you have doubts.
What's ironic is that in the end, Churchill needed to rally support from the parties that he never gave a second thought about: the Outer Cabinet and the British people.
Go to the people. Let them instruct you. Tell them the truth, unvarnished.
It's no surprise that this scene, this panning shot, is repeated at the end of the film, a callback to his first day as Prime Minister, because this time, the moment Churchill steps out of his vehicle, he has won. He puts himself in a position he's unfamiliar with, and it allows him to bridge the disconnect between himself and the people he leads. Where many of the politicians in the film have never had much face time with commoners, Churchill, simply by asking for help and opening up to their thought, became a true leader. By facing the people directly, Churchill reduces himself to a character that is no longer viewed as larger than life, hidden behind his war room and servants, no longer impervious, but rather vulnerable. If we all took a second to admit our own vulnerabilities and listen to one another, then perhaps we would all be a bit better off. Thank you. Hey everyone, there's over 20 of you now watching my videos, and that is honestly just shocking to me. Thank you for taking the time to listen to what I have to say. I thought I'd do something a little different and deviate from the writing video essays to talk more about a film's message and theme this time, because I believe that understanding theme is critical to writing a good story. If you have watched Darkest Hour, I want to know your thoughts and takes on the film's theme. Till next time.